All right, let's get right into it. We're not talking about oil or gas today. We're talking about a group of 17 pretty obscure metals that are, believe it or not, quietly defining the next era of global power. People have started calling them the new oil, and for good reason. Just like oil in the 20th century, the countries that control these metals, well, they hold some serious strategic cards. So here's a question for you. What does a state-of-the-art fighter jet, the electric car you see driving down the street, and the smartphone that's almost definitely in your hand right now, what do they all have in common? What's the one critical ingredient that connects all of them?
Well, the answer is this incredible family of metals that are basically the hidden workhorses of our modern world. We're talking about the powerful magnets inside an F-35 jet and the motor of an EV, the vibrant colors on your smartphone screen, the pinpoint precision of missile guidance systems. They are literally everywhere, and yet most of us have never even heard of them.
What we're talking about are rare earth elements, or REEs for short. Now here's the thing. The name is actually kind of misleading. They aren't all that rare in the Earth's crust. The real challenge, the real choke point, isn't finding them. It's the incredibly complex, expensive, and often environmentally messy process of separating and refining them into something you could actually use. And control over that process, well, that's where the real power is.
So, that brings us to the big question. How on earth did one single country manage to get an almost complete stranglehold over this entire critical industry?
You know, it's kind of wild to think about, but for decades, the US was actually the world leader, all thanks to one mine in California called Mountain Pass. But then, starting in the 80s, China began this very calculated rise. They flooded the global market with cheap rare earths, which basically drove their competitors out of business. At the same time, they were acquiring key Western tech, like General Motors' advanced magnet division. Then, just as the US started to stumble with environmental issues, China went all in, consolidating its entire industry into 6 massive state-owned giants that now pretty much call the shots on global supply and prices.
So if you look at just digging the stuff out of the ground, the mining part, China accounts for about 70% of the world's total. That's a dominant position, no question. But as huge as that number is, believe it or not, it doesn't even tell the whole story.
This is where it gets really crazy. The real bottleneck, the part that requires all the complex technology, is the processing. And here, China controls nearly 90% of the global market. I mean, think about that. You could discover a huge deposit of this stuff in Australia or the US, but chances are you still have to send it all the way to China to get it turned into something useful. That gives Beijing an unbelievable grip on the entire global supply chain.
This mine-to-magnet chain really shows you just how deep that control goes. From digging the ore out of the ground, to the super complex refining, to producing the actual metal, and finally, manufacturing the high-tech magnets that go into almost everything we've talked about, China dominates every single one of those steps. They don't just own the beginning of the chain, they own the entire thing.
And as we've seen happen before, when you have that much economic control, it can pretty quickly be turned into a powerful geopolitical weapon.
And this isn't just some what-if scenario. It has already happened. Back in 2010, China completely cut off rare earth exports to Japan during a political dispute, sending absolute shockwaves through global industry. More recently, in 2025, they announced new export restrictions that made prices spike by over 40%, and then they tightened the rules on magnet technology itself, which many saw as a direct shot at US chip restrictions. The message couldn't be clearer. Beijing is not afraid to pull this lever.
It's exactly what former WTO ambassador Jayant Dasgupta pointed out. This isn't just about business. It's a strategic challenge that hits at the heart of not just economics, but national security for countries all over the planet. Okay, to really understand what this looks like for a single country, let's zoom in on the high-stakes dilemma facing a major rising power like India. So here's the paradox for India. On one hand, they are sitting on the world's 5th largest reserves of this stuff. It's right there, in the ground. But the reality is, they just don't have the advanced technology needed for the complex processing and magnet manufacturing. And to make it even harder, their ore concentration is way lower than in places like China or the US, making it more expensive to even get started. So what's the result? India is almost completely dependent on its main geopolitical rival, China, for the finished products that power its own economy and military.
And get this, even if India went all in, starting today, throwing everything they have at this problem, experts figure it would still take 5, maybe even 10 years to build a truly self-reliant mine-to-magnet supply chain. That's a full decade of vulnerability for their tech, defense, and green energy goals.
Now, India's not alone in this. This feeling of vulnerability is spreading across the globe, and it's kicking off this massive, frantic race to adapt and build some kind of resilience.
So what are countries doing? Well, it's a multi-pronged attack, really. The U.S. is pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into bringing processing back home. Countries are forming new alliances, the U.S., the EU, Japan, to fund projects outside of China. Both the U.S. and India are planning to stockpile these minerals just like they do with oil. And innovators are working on two fronts, figuring out how to recycle rare earths from all our old electronics, and, maybe most importantly, designing new technologies that don't need them in the first place.
But, and this is a big but, we have to be realistic about the scale of the challenge here. Just look at this. This is the production for the most common type of high-power magnets. China is churning out around 138,000 tons. The brand new capacity the U.S. hopes to have online by 2025, just 1,000 tons. The world is definitely waking up, but catching up is going to be a monumental task.
This quote from NDTV Profit just sums it up perfectly. The strategic resource that could spark the next major global supply crisis isn't going to be drilled from the ground as a liquid. It's a handful of metals that are already powering our future.
So I'll just leave you with this one last thought. The great supply shocks of the past, the ones that defined geopolitics for generations, came from a barrel of oil. But as we've seen, the next one might be powered by something much, much smaller. Something that's already in your car, in your home, and, yes, right now, probably in your pocket.